I originally, just up to 5 minutes ago, I planned to open the program today talking about a couple of issues that are going on in the state legislature in Boise. But before I do that, as I was listening to the newscast from Fox, I also, in the last 5 minutes before 8 o'clock, had seen this on a website. You've got the CEO of Apple saying that he will not cooperate, even though a judge is ordering Apple to cooperate with the federal government to break the encryption on the Apple iPhone that was being used by one of the terrorists that shot up that party just before Christmas in San Bernardino, California. Killing 14 and injur- injuring nearly as many people when that occurred. And he says, we're not going to be forced to do this. And, this is a precedent that we feel would be bad. The government will be looking into everybody's cell phone use, and we simply can't have that. We feel it's an unreasonable search and seizure. Two things. In China, when the government demands that Apple do something like this, guess what happens? Apple does it. Apple has a different set of rules when it's doing business in countries that have authoritarian governments. And some might argue that we've got one here now, but Apple has a different set of rules when it's working with the communist Chinese than it does when it's working with the United States government. So, number one, there's a bit of hypocrisy going on there. Number two, if Lavoy Finicum had owned an Apple iPhone, do you think Apple would be putting up a stink if the government wanted that phone, the encryption broken on that phone? See, there's a question that I raised because, well, yeah, but we've got to protect our friends in the Muslim Brotherhood. There was a story I happened to see at Middle East Forum yesterday, and it mentions that after the St. Valentine's Day massacre in Chicago, Illinois, and that happened, now we're looking back 87 years? 87 years ago on Sunday would be the anniversary. After all of those people, 7 people, I believe, killed, shot down by Al Capone's gang, or it's believed it was Al Capone's gang, there was a great hue and cry in Chicago that they needed to crack down on organized crime and what it was doing to the city because the crime wave was tearing the social fabric apart. You did not have Italian Americans who came forward and demanded that, this is just an attack on us. And yet, following San Bernardino, Muslim groups all over the country are saying, well, you can't tar all of us with the same brush. No, but an investigation into Al Capone was not an investigation into Americans of Italian ancestry or Italian birth. You got it? It was the investigation into a criminal. So the investigation that's going on in San Bernardino, California, it's an investigation of criminals, not the entire Muslim faith. Now, some of us might argue that the entire faith could be investigated, but that's not what's going on here. So the constant swirl of hypocrisy that's going on with all of this is just beyond me. And the folks over at Apple, if you were to walk through that boardroom and ask how many of you vote for Democrats, you'd get a unanimous raising of hands. How many of you would like Bernie Sanders to be president? You'd probably get most of the hands going up. I suspect they're still mainly supporting Hillary Clinton, but the valley where they produce all of this technology, this is not exactly what you'd call flag-waving America. Not patriotic America by any means. It's just Hippocratic America. 10 minutes after 8 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Jeremy Daly going to be joining us in 20 minutes from Trip Family Medicine. He is a physician assistant. We're talking cancer in the next half hour. I know that's an exciting topic, and you're all thinking, gee, how can I get it? Now, I understand that's not what you're thinking at all. But how does it impact family members? I had a brother who passed away from cancer 6 years ago. And I'll tell you what, it's devastating not only for the individual who has the illness, but it's devastating as well for the family members who are dealing with this and trying to comfort the afflicted, and also having to I have a niece who came through a cancer scare a few years ago, and my sister is still dealing with the after effects of that 4 years later. So it's not a pretty thing. Jeremy coming up. Also in the 9 o'clock hour, the new mayor of Twin Falls, Sean Beauregard, going to be joining us. Sean will be talking a handful of issues related to the city of Twin Falls. So following the 9 o'clock news, if you have a question or comment for Sean, feel free to call us here at the radio station. That telephone number, 736-0300. And the radio station is News Radio 1310, KLIX. And you can also listen to us online on the web, newsradio1310.com. That means you can hear us anywhere all over the world. We have a caller with us. It's 34, and good morning.
Yeah. As for the AT&T thing, the Bible makes it clear you must obey everything the government tells you to do, no matter what. I don't understand why people are rebelling against the government right now,
Well,
or why AT&T is doing this.
I'll put it this way. I don't know what your church is. My church says we should
I
follow
wouldn't say it.
authority. Keep interrupting. Thank you. My church says we should follow authority, but it also says if the authority is wrong, then you shouldn't be following it because the authority, if it's wrong, is likely following the deceiver. Thank you very much for the telephone call, sir. 12 minutes after 8 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Got these two things. Speaking of government, more than a decade after the federal government implemented the Real ID Act of 2005, Idaho legislators are going to consider complying with its tough terms. This is from the Associated Press this morning. The measure to lift the ban on Real ID will have a legislative hearing. When did we, in this country, speaking as long as our previous caller wanted to mention the biblical issues, when did we all start walking around with the mark of the beast? Well, some people say it was when we got issued Social Security cards way back in 1936, which were never meant to be universal identifiers. Try getting a job or holding a job without having that card, and you've got to produce that. You've got to produce a driver's license. Heck, I'm surprised they're not even asking you for your DNA test, and maybe a mind scan too as well, which science has said is a lot easier to do now. We can pretty much read a lot of thoughts that people have. That may be the next step in all of this. But the Real ID Act, which was a response to 9/11, more than 10 years old now, that is the one that says if you want certain privileges, like getting on an airplane or getting on a train or going into a federal building, and if you have to go to a Social Security office, that would be part of that, you've got to produce a driver's license. And many times that has a gold star on it. If you don't have the gold star, well, tough cookies. Then you can't board a flight. You can't board a train. You can't board a bus. You can't walk into the local federal building to check on a benefit you may have. All of those things are out. So now that driver's license has become a universal identifier, just as the Social Security card did, both of which were never to be those things. And we'll follow it up with this. So when you're wondering about how good your government is and why we should obey it all the time, if your government is leading you straight to hell, I think you have to go back and say, whoa, wait a minute. It might be time for a new government. How about this? This is also from Associated Press today. Your Health Idaho's executive director says more than 102,000 Idahoans are currently enrolled in health insurance plans on the state-based exchange, making Idaho second in the nation for per capita enrollments. First-time enrollees made up roughly a third of the total enrollment. So there's some people there who are very happy with all of that, but let me just share with you what happens a lot of times when you get involved with these things. I don't know a lot about how the state of Minnesota works. I've only visited there once, way back about 16 years ago. But I am sure that a lot of these things, one design fits all, or if it doesn't, they're similar to some degree. This comes from the Duluth News-Tribune, which is way up there in the northeastern corner of the state of Minnesota, right on the Canadian border and along Lake Superior. Scott Killerud was about to throw away a mailing about the 2016 enrollment period for Minnesota Sure last November when something caught his eye. Just as I was going to drop it in the trash, I was like, wait a second, what did I just read? The Pine County Farmer said. What caught his eye was a notification that if you're 55 or older and on medical assistance, Minnesota's version of Medicaid, the state places an estate claim with which to recover its costs after you and your spouse have died. Killerud was younger than 55, but his wife Ellen had reached that age the previous September. The couple who supplement their farm income with part-time jobs were told when they signed up for insurance 2 years ago that their income level qualified them for medical assistance. But they didn't know about the estate claim until Scott saw that mailing. And then I'll give you just a little bit more of this, and we'll grab a telephone caller very quickly after that. And caller, if you're patient, stay there for a moment. We'll get to your call in just a moment. It says Ellen's free coverage had, in fact, in a little more than a year, run up a future bill of about $11,000 against their estate. The Killeroods were startled. We don't carry any debt, he said. We don't have any credit card debt. We don't even have a mortgage. We're just not of that mentality that, you shouldn't have something owed. It's something we're very uncomfortable with. And finding this out, it's blindsided us. And then it goes on to say they aren't alone. Throughout the state of Minnesota, the government has been signing people up for free coverage and then coming in and seizing their estates. These people are going to lose their farm. The government is not your friend. These government programs are just putting tentacles into your body and sucking you dry. 817, you're up next. You're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story.
Bill, I couldn't help but call in about your last caller. I think this is the problem we have all the way around is people read scriptures. They read one verse and take it as gospel without reading the whole chapter that qualifies everything. This is where we go wrong when we think that government laws supersede God's laws. We're supposed to obey laws, and that is a fact. He is right there. But when the laws are making us do things that are against God's will, that's not right.
Well,
Just
let me interrupt you for a moment and maybe get your response to this. Let's say you're living in 1855, and all of a sudden, a family of black folks show up at your house, and the government says you've got to return them to their master in the South. What do? You're in quite a moral dilemma.
Well, you're a moral dilemma, but God says all people are equal and free. Who was it that helped release the white people? I mean, the black people. It was white people. They harbored them. They did everything they could. I mean, what did Moses do? Moses went out and rescued the people that were enslaved. But again, our Constitution says the same thing. We need to obey the laws of the land unless they contradict the Constitution. Then we have the right to stand up and say, no, you guys are making this wrong.
Which is why we have courts to adjudicate these issues.
Right, correct. And sometimes they go through courts, and it's still a problem. So you got to find that fine line. Tyranny is tyranny. So and we gotta do something about that.
Hey, thank you for the call. And keep in mind, if you go into court too and your defense is strictly biblical, not going to help you out. Especially, if the judge is of the Jewish persuasion, may not necessarily believe in the same things that you believe in, quite the same things. May believe in some, but that's the point. It's not going to be your legal defense. The government will respect your faith, you would hope, up to a point. But we're seeing it here in Idaho. You've got a government right now that would like to take over people's family lives, saying that, faith healing and prayer aren't the way to go if you've got a sick child. So the government, knowing better, needs to step in. And we shared that last week because we have a local pastor who made a great argument saying if they feel that way, then they should stop abortion. But to use that as your argument on all of these issues isn't going to fly. I mean, go ahead. Don't try it on the radio. Go into court and try it. See how it works. 20 after 8. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com. It's 36. More of your telephone calls coming up. And Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine at 8:30. If you were not yet aware of it, Sean Beauregard, the new mayor of Twin Falls, elected by his fellow council members a few weeks ago, he's going to be joining us in studio just after the 9 o'clock news. If you have a question or comment for him, feel free to give us a call at 736-0300. The show's called Top Story with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Before we get back to our telephone callers and topic du jour, I wanted to remind you about High Desert Meat Processing here in Twin Falls, where they process, and this is the key, one animal at a time, and what you bring in is exactly what you'll get back. Darren Van Horn. He's the owner. He's been doing this almost 35 years in Twin Falls. You can visit High Desert Meat Processing on Facebook, and they have reviews of other customers, or give High Desert Meat Processing a call for all of your wild game and domestic processing needs, 734-9949. High Desert Meat does in-house smoking, and nothing gets shipped out, and they do specialty meats as well. Polish dogs, hot dogs, kielbasa, jerky, pepperoni, salami, summer sausage, much more. USDA approved. Darren works closely with local beef growers. We'll get that right. I almost said leek, as in leeks that you chew on. But they're very good with beef, too. I mean, I've been to some of these leek dinners. Local beef growers and their programs to ensure quality meat, 734-9949. We used to get thrown out of school when I was a kid for eating leeks. So guys who didn't want to go to class that day would actually sit down on their way to school and chew on it, because they grew wild in many places where I was growing up. They'd eat these things on the way to school, and then They'd get there and somebody'd say, "Holy moly, what died in your mouth?" And they'd get sent home. 825, Bill Colley with you on Top Story, and you're up next. You're on the air.
Yes. I just wanted to comment a little bit about your last caller. I have to agree with him 100%. Only want to add a little bit that, yes, anytime that the government laws supersede God's laws, um, we don't follow the government. We have to follow Jehovah God. And yes, he does have a name, and it's Jehovah. But that being said, um, we have to be willing to suffer the consequences that the government may instill upon us when we follow God and his laws. So there's many out there that aren't, just like one of the commandments are thou shalt not kill, but yet we go to war and kill other people. So, there's a fine line. But anyway, we have to be able to suffer the consequences.
Right. In fact, many early Christians suffered them and suffered them well.
Yes. There's a lot of Christians that are willing to suffer that, and then there's a lot of them that aren't willing to do it. But anyway, I just wanted to make that comment, and thank you for taking my call.
Absolutely. Thank you. Got to remember, though, the government is not a Christian government. At least that's not how it any longer perceives itself. No, there may have been a time in the 1800s when it perceived itself that way. But then it got challenged. People said, well, which Christian church are you the government of? And all of these things came up. So we've got to deal with that. You walk into court again, if you say the Bible is my defense, court's going to say, well, that's good for you, but this is what our law says, and the Constitution is not the Bible. There's a friend of mine who's actually an evangelical pastor once said to me, he said, they reference the Creator a lot in founding documents, but they don't talk about Jesus. And there was a reason for that, and we all have to understand that. We're living sort of with one foot in both worlds, and if you're not a Christian, all of the rest of that's irrelevant. You're not even living in both realms. Quickly, I've got this. James Sensenbrenner, congressman from Wisconsin. And he goes on to say today in his opinion column, I guess he's a guest columnist in the Wall Street Journal, welcome to the legal minefield laid by Obama and the feds. Talking a little bit about our troubles with government law, through the first 5 years, now remember, he's wrapping up year number 8, so just through the first 5 years of his presidency, Mr. Obama added 11,327 pages to the Code of Federal Regulations. No one knows how many criminal laws are contained in the compendium of legal rules and regulations promulgated by executive departments and administrative agencies. He's a politician. He's got to say promulgated. When I asked the Congressional Research Service to investigate, they said they didn't have the resources to answer. One thing is certain, though, no matter how many laws there are, Americans are subject to them all. As John Baker, a retired law professor at Louisiana State University, told the Journal in 2011, there is no one in the United States over the age of 18 who cannot be indicted for some federal crime. It is said that every day when you get up and head for work, by the time you come home from work at the end of the day, that you likely have violated dozens and dozens of laws that are on the books without even knowing that. Think about that just for a moment. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. We've got Better Health coming up with Trip Family Medicine in just a few minutes. Did want to mention that as well. Also, I want to mention a couple of other things, too. We have Sean Beauregard coming up, new mayor of Twin Falls, following 9 o'clock news. Tomorrow, Friday, I believe it is. I believe Friday, Rich Wills is going to join us. We had his primary opponent with us on the air on Monday morning, and in fairness, have offered him an opportunity to also speak, and he took us up on it. We're just trying to nail down the exact time and day at this point. It's 8:30. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. 37 right now. News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com.